Okay. All right, guys. So I just wanted to go over some little tips, tricks, how-tos with ZBrush. So for you guys who haven't used ZBrush before, you get a little bit of an idea of what you need to do. So I'm just going to open up a Dynamesh sphere just so I can go through some examples. All right. So we'll start with navigation. So to rotate around your scene, you just click in your canvas anywhere that's not on your object, and you can move around and rotate it. Okay. If you want to pan, you hold down Alt and you click and drag in your negative space, and it'll allow you to pan. And if you want to zoom, it's Alt, click, let go of Alt, and then drag. So again, that's Alt, click, let go of Alt while clicking, and drag. And that's your pan. Okay. You also see that we have some depth of field going on here with our focal shift. So we have perspective currently on. You can see that highlighted over here. If you wanted to change it to an orthographic camera, you can just hit P on your keyboard or click on the perspective. So everything will lay flat in an orthographic view now. If you're trying to get to the top, let's say, or to the side and get it perfectly straight, and you have problems with it, while you're turning your camera, if you hold down Shift, it'll snap to that axis. So if I'm trying to get a front view, while I turn, hold down Shift, snaps. Okay. So those are the basics of navigation. One more thing is if you are working on your tool and say you're zoomed in really, really far, you're sculpting, and you try to move and you can't because your tool is taking up the entire scene, you have this little white box on the edge here. This is your safe area, so I can actually move around. If I click with inside of here, I can also zoom, I can rotate, just as long as you're out in this little safe zone. If you want to have everything framed in, you just hit F on your keyboard and it frames in for you. Okay. So I'm going to go through the little palettes here on the left side. So if you click at the top, these are all your brushes. These are the default brushes in here. There's hidden ones inside the light box. There's also custom ones that you can make. But by default, this is what ZBrush has inside of it. You can either click here to bring it up, or you can hit B on your keyboard. It'll bring up your brush palette. If you know the name of your brush that you use most often, so I'll hit B, and I use clay tubes. So clay tubes starts with C. It'll isolate down all the brushes that start with C, and then there's my clay tubes, and it says T right there, so I can hit T. Now I have my clay tubes brush. Underneath that, you have your stroke pattern. So these all do different little things. So I'll start with the dots. Probably not going to notice it too much, but what it's doing is just laying down a series of dots as I'm going through here. Freehand, it just takes your stroke and stretches it out. Drag rectangle, what this does is whatever your alpha is, if I click and drag on here, it'll put that alpha on the surface. Color spray, really only applicable if you have color. You have the two different color palettes here. Spray, the way this works is it takes your alpha and it sprays it out, kind of like the spray can in MS Paint. And then you have your drag dot, where it takes your alpha and you can just click and drag it across the surface and drop it down. The size of this is based off the size of your brush. If you want to change your brush size, you have your draw size here. You can do that. You also have your focal shift. So there's that little circle on the inside. That controls the fall off of your alpha. Okay. So we can go to alpha, and we can change our alpha too. So you can also import alphas, just black and white images, and they can be anything that you want. But I can take this, use drag rectangle, boom. So that's an option for you. Textures, these are good for when you are actually have a texture for a model that you want to bring in. You can import it in, and then you can select it. And if your UVs are laid out, it'll apply it. You can apply it. Material. This changes your display properties of your object. So different materials will display differently. Some have specularity, some have reflectivity, others are matte. So, boom. You have your color here. You can change this around. You can do a gradation. This is if you're painting the colors on. Switch colors. Go back and forth on this. Okay. So that's that. So when you're using your brush, here you go to stroke. Let me change this to freehand. It'll pull it out. Okay, and that pulls the surface out. So if I hit Shift F, that brings up my polyframe, and you can see those polygons right there. You also hit polyframe down here, and it'll display it as well. So just clicking and dragging on most brushes will pull out of the surface. If you hold down Alt, you'll notice the little reticle gets a little minus on it. That'll push in your surface, or do the opposite of whatever that brush does by default. There's some brushes that will push in by default, and so if I hold down Alt, it'll actually pull out on those brushes. Okay. If you hold down Shift, it turns blue, and that's smooth and soften brush. So it'll soften those transitions for you. Alright, and one of the other things you can do is mask with your brush. So if you hold down Control, you'll see your brush turn yellow. So you can actually mask off areas. And what that does is you can paint this on. It protects that area from you sculpting on it. So I can come in here and I can, let me bring my intensity up a little bit. Do that all day, and it won't affect the area that's masked off. If you want to invert your mask, it's Control and click in the negative space, invert your mask. If you want to soften your mask, it's Control, click on the mask, and it softens the transitions. If you want to harden the mask, it's Control, Alt, and click. It'll harden that mask up. Okay. Additionally, you can, while you're holding down Control, change the stroke. And you can get things like the lasso tool, so you can do something like that, lasso off areas while it's masked. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the Transpose tool. So show you how that works. So up here you have your edit, draw, move, scale, and rotate. Currently we're in draw mode. That's what allows us to actually sculpt. The move transpose. So your transpose tool is these little arms that you can pull off your surface. Okay. So if you pull it off, what it's going to do is that's your starting point, your pivot point, and then this is the little arm that it can affect it. When you drop this, it's going to try to adhere to the surface. So that is going to be on the surface, and that's going to be on the surface. Okay. Wherever I put it. If I want it to just come out straight and not be on the surface at all, I can click and drag out. If you hold down Shift, it'll just do it based off the world grid. Okay, so we'll just do that, and I'll place it right here, and it'll see it go right through. Okay. So the way the Move Transpose tool works is this is my pivot point here. Everything gets all funky. It tries to go to the origin if you start from there. Okay? And there's a little red circle, that's what you actually adjust. Okay? If you actually want to move a tool, you just click here and drag. In the middle one and drag out. Now it's mirrored, so it's starting to pull it apart and stretch it. But it's still moving it the way you would normally want to move stuff. If I grab this guy, what it's going to do is it's going to skew everything in that direction. So I can start stretching it, and it's doing it based off this point here. I like to use this for when I'm trying to scale in one axis. So if I hold down Shift, click and drag, I can hold down Shift and click and drag on this, and it'll only scale up and down no matter what I do. So if I'm trying to scale in one direction, I'll use the Move tool to do that. Scale tool. So start from the outside this time. If I want to scale uniformly, if I click and drag on that, everything will scale uniformly from this origin point. If I click here, it's going to scale in the opposite direction that this edge is going. So I'll show you how that looks. So it's scaling this way. Okay. And then if you go from the middle, it'll scale uniformly. It'll just scale up. And then there's the rotate. So click and drag out with the rotate. So this is the pivot point on the rotate. So if I click and drag out, it's going to start to flare out from the bottom. Go out like that. And pivot point's up there. There we go. Okay. If I do it from there, what it does is it does it in the axis going this way. So it tries to rotate it along that. So when you switch between move, scale, and rotate, you don't have to redraw this guy out either. Like you go through all of them, and it still stays there in the same spot. Okay. And one more thing I want to go over before I end this video is if you're on a tool, on any of these tools, and you're not sure what it does, you can hover over it. It'll give you the shortcut keys, but if you hold down Control, it'll actually give you the help documents for that button or that slider. And that's for everything inside of ZBrush. Alright. Tells you everything they do. So if you have any questions about what's going on or what a certain button does, you hold down Control over it. It tells you everything you need to know about it. Okay, so it's really nice to have that. And I think that's going to wrap that up for this video.